Welcome to Strategy Next, the podcast where bold ideas and visionary strategies shape the future of business. Brought to you by J. Helmy and Company, we unlock insights from trailblazing leaders and innovators, redefining what's possible. From scaling startups to transforming global enterprises, Strategy Next is your guide to staying ahead, innovating boldly, and leading with purpose. The future doesn't wait. Let's discover what's next together.
Hello, and thank you for joining us once again on Strategy Next from J. Helmy and Company. Today, a very special guest. She grew up in a tough childhood, overcame a lot of adversity, and rose to become a COO of a multinational corporation by the age of 24. She served as a senior leader at Accenture, IBM, and other top companies. She has been known to say that we can have it all as long as we have #no excuses. Welcome to the program, Victoria Pelletier.
Thanks for having me, John. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And I forgot to mention that you're joining us from lovely South Beach today, where I'm sure the weather is better than a lot of the rest of the country.
Yes, although a little hot, so if you're okay with that, it's good.
Okay, terrific. I know that you focus a lot on the concept of corporate resilience amidst change, and so many of our listeners these days are going through change in the workplace. Can you expand a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Well, change is really our only constant, as the saying goes. And for me personally, to kind of set the stage before I talk around maybe how I talk to other leaders in the space, I have been a part of or supported 40 merger, acquisition, or related transactions. Some of those are divestitures, et cetera. And so that in itself creates significant change. Now you add on to that what happened with the pandemic and specifically where we worked and how we worked. And now as we hear about AI or Gen AI in particular and how that machine learning, and just in general, digital transformation is changing the way we're working and the tools that we're utilizing. It's all just incredibly constant. And I don't see any end in sight for that, first of all. So I start off by telling people that you have to have the right mindset around this and understanding the benefits of what this means versus just focusing on the negative pieces of the fact that I'm going to have to change what I do, who I do it for, those kinds of things. And I actually think one of the most critical elements of successful transition, transformation, all those pieces is change management. And in a very different way than most companies think about it, oftentimes change management is a combination of strong project or program management with communication focus, but it's so much more than that, or because it is so human and personal to each of us. So it needs to be dealing with mindset, the way in which we communicate, what we communicate to people, and helping, particularly as leaders, bridge the gap of the what does this mean for me? What is in it for me? And saying those positive things to ensure success.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it seems like if you went back even 3 or 5 or 10 years, some leaders of corporations would view change management as, oh, that's a nice webinar that HR is going to put on Thursday. But really what I hear you saying, and I think is a reality for many of our listeners, is that change management is crucial. I mean, if you don't manage change within your organization, how can you manage your clients, your business, your profitability?
Agree. And so you named a couple of the companies that I worked for over the last number of years, being Accenture, being IBM, Aon, Amex. And I actually, when I was at IBM, one of the last roles I held was leading our change management practice across all of the Americas, and realized, and at one point I had to push a number of our team members that were in front of our clients to say the risk associated with IBM implementing new technologies, maybe it's running new technologies, or just other strategic engagements we might be doing. If we're not part of the change management process, and this is not because I'm going to say I don't trust other companies to do it well, but I've just seen time and time again a piece missing from it. Then I said, we actually need to think about the way we price our business or the service level agreements we commit, because in many cases, it is user behavior or it's the configuration of technology that they want something, but they're not sure what that means down to the individual, what they call persona, the individual person who's using it. And so, I've strongly pushed the necessity for strong change management that is more than just a really great and robust project plan.
Excellent. Very insightful. You talk about no excuses. Do you find that in business today, I certainly find that there are some folks, even those leaders who will say, the buck stops here, I take ownership, but the reason we missed on those numbers was because this hit or that hit. Do you find even at the highest levels of corporate America that there's excuse making?
Of course. I most definitely do. And so my no excuses, and I do sign a lot of my social media posts with hashtag no excuses. The other one's unstoppable. That's like my philosophy is to achieve anything I set my goal or in my mind to, the goals, objectives for myself. But I get that by the mindset of no excuses. And that is around taking absolute accountability. Now, there are some things we cannot control. Like you think about just the headwinds that come at us, the macroeconomic conditions, or the wars that are happening in our world. There's things we cannot control. What we do control is how we react and respond to those things. And in some cases, that might legitimately have an impact to our sales or our revenue or profitability. Yes. But then at that point, this is where don't make the call when you're reporting quarterly earnings, right? We should have had enough foresight. And again, that's accountability on us to see that. And I think a lot of people don't want to go put their hand up and say, like, I own this. It's hard. We're fearful of what that's going to mean, the repercussions for us personally, not just in terms of bonuses, but I find in more cases, it's like, what are people going to think about me? And so I find it's tough for people to step into that zone of discomfort.
Absolutely. I once heard you referred to as the CEO whisperer, which I thought is just a great moniker. But when I think about that, do you in fact have to whisper in a leader's ear because you don't want to embarrass them, or because you feel like if you were to call them out in front of their team, it could be harmful? Do you find like you have to be careful, in other words, the way you approach some leaders?
The answer, and this will be typical consultant speak, is it depends. And it depends on the situation. I think there's certain times and places we need to call out leaders, people, not even just leaders. And by the way, a leader is regardless of hierarchy. We're all leaders in our own right. And so sometimes it's appropriate to call it out. I think about like inappropriate language or things when we think about our diverse colleagues. And there's still ways to say it that are more effective than others. But yes, there are times that those conversations need to happen not in front of an audience so that they are more receptive to hear it. And as ultimately, yes, as the CEO, you don't necessarily, or very senior leader, you don't necessarily want to be challenging them in front of their direct reports. The most important thing in all of this, I believe, is to have built a strong relationship with, and therefore trust with the person that you're going to give that feedback to. That having that kind of radical candor with someone that comes from a place of genuine care and compassion and desire for the improvement in their performance versus just being a jerk and wanting to stick it to them by saying, I got a different way to do this.
Yep. And you have to earn that place of trust, right? You can't just say, well, I've arrived. I'm Victoria. I know what to do. Take notes.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a certain amount of credentialization when you walk into certain meetings so I got my nickname CEO Whisperer was actually from my time at Accenture. One of our senior executives had labeled me that. And I think it's because I did have a series of credentials. I myself have held C-suite titles, including CEO in the past. So that helps give some credibility, but it also comes with the fact that I'd built some trust with a number of these leaders. I find there's many people tell others what they want to hear, not what they need to hear. And
Absolutely.
So I'm known for having experience through transformation, maybe holding the similar or same roles as some of these individuals, but the trust comes from actually, being unfiltered from a place of like necessity for them to be successful.
Absolutely. So I know you've been a CEO, you're a fantastically successful speaker, you're an author, and you're a mom and a wife. How do you do it all? And of course, the question I think many listeners will want to know is, has it been twice as tough because you are a female in corporate America?
So I'll address the first to come to the female specific question. So I have a I have lots of Victoria-isms. And there's another one that I say in that where there is conviction, there's capacity. And this comes again tied closely to no excuses. And so I actually hate the question, how do you have it all or do it all? And the reality is for me, I've thought of it as work, personal, or created these separate spheres. For me, it's all just life. And so treating it in that way. And that does mean at times there are trade-offs and there are compromises that have had to be made over the years. And I think I've made the right ones at the right times. I remember when my youngest was like 2 and 3 years old, I spent almost 100%. We had done 6 acquisitions for the company I worked for in 18 months. And I was on the road nonstop.
Wow.
So did I miss seeing, actually, I remember coming home on the weekends and like my little one was speaking in full sentences. Like I literally in 5 days or 6 days gone, like had missed things. But when my ex passed away a little over 11 years ago, and at that point I was traveling probably like 50 to 70% of the time. As then a single parent, I needed to make some different decisions. And so I changed my job, even though I loved it, to one that made sense for my children at that time, right? So that's kind of the compromise and trade-off. And so that's how I've been able to do all the things that I've done, maintain side hustles, sit on boards, be partnered, have 2 now adult children. So it's a lot easier now. And to your second question, John, on being a woman, yes, it has been difficult. From entering into that first executive role at age 24, one, I was a brand new mother. My oldest was only a few months old. And so stepping in with very little maternity leave to even, step into this very, very demanding role and having people question me, quite frankly, even just like my male counterparts wouldn't necessarily, I've never heard men be questioned when they come back after, in this case, I think I'd taken 3 months off. And I'm originally from Canada. So we're talking about 1 year mat leave available if I wanted it. And so just people challenging me on that regard. So from those kinds of things to some of this I bear, I take accountability for how I showed up. I had no strong female examples of leadership when I entered the workforce. What I saw was on television or what I'd experienced in work. And it was this top-down command and control. I never saw any like emotional side to a lot of these leaders, certainly no vulnerability. So although I am that kind of person, I never showed it. So I had a nickname I'm embarrassed of from back in my mid to late 20s as the Iron Maiden. And that's because I was like, I don't want anyone to question my seat at the table as the youngest executive by at least 20 years, the only female as well. And so I showed up a very particular way. But I wasn't proud of that because it's actually not who I am. So I needed a shift to be very different. So now my nickname's Turtle. So I'm still very tough, extremely resilient, but you will see the softness, the mushy side of me on the inside.
Love it. That's wonderful. Let me switch gears a little bit. The topic of DE&I have read recently, I think maybe Business Week had something about how it became kind of we all must have a diversity officer. We're going to make that a board position. We're committed. It seemed like that had a high point during the pandemic, perhaps. And most recently, there's been a little bit of pulling back or shifting away from that commitment. Can you speak to that at all in terms of your experience?
Yeah, there was this absolute crescendo, and one of the most posted positions were for chief diversity and inclusion officers. And that comes out of, for the listeners at least who are in North America and US in particular, from what happened with George Floyd. That is where a lot of the conversation hit ahead. And there was so much more focus on underrepresented minorities, in particularly our Black and Brown colleagues, but diversity much more broadly. And then sadly, just politics, I know we don't want to get into too much of a political conversation, has changed, and a lot of things being repealed and people being called diversity hires as a real and negative connotations associated with that. So we've seen, and even in my own state of Florida, our governor has canceled publicly funded chief diversity type roles or programs. And so there's been a response to that. And rather, it saddens me for a whole host of reasons. The reality is we are not where we should be. Our workforce does not mirror our communities. The fact is, of the Fortune 500 companies, only 10% have female CEOs, and there are only 6 Black CEOs. Venture capital, less than 2% of venture capital funding go to women. And so it's just, the reality is that, the data is the data. So I'm a fan of meritocracy. Do not get me wrong. I do not think you have to trade off strong performance for having a diverse workforce. It's an and. And actually, I think when you bring the two together, the strength of a very diverse workforce creates a stronger sense of belonging, which actually drives employee engagement, employee retention, which ultimately drives your top and your bottom line. So it's the right thing to do. So for me, I'm sad to see it get repealed back as though it's just a cost center and something we take out versus just a commitment to doing what we should be doing all along.
Absolutely. Another hot topic these days is work from home. Amazon has been in the news with must be back in the office. Other companies have had CEOs that, by the way, though, they'll be working from their company-provided office close to their house. Any thoughts on that debate? I believe you're working in your home office today. I'm doing the same. It
That's
works
right.
for us, but do you have any thoughts in general on, and perhaps the perspective from leadership, American leadership?
Yeah, it's disappointing to see this forced return fully to an office. That actually started primarily in financial services, and now we're seeing that wave all the way through to tech firms who were some of the first to allow much more like flexible home or hybrid environments. And I do believe that we should be focused on hybrid models. The reality is, going back to our earlier conversation and my phrase of like conviction, capacity, how do you do all this stuff? Let's trust our employees to, meet the deliverables of their role. So for me, I think I said to my team probably like 10 or 15 years ago, I remember saying when people asked me if they could leave early for a doctor's appointment or a kid's soccer game or something, I'm like, look, you don't need to ask me. There are no schedules. There are just deliverables. And so that's how I've operated. And that's built trust with my team. And so, it was sad that during like COVID times, they were like testing and people were getting those mouse jigglers and stuff. And there were some people for sure who like didn't follow. They weren't focused maybe on all the deliverables, or they were so good at it, they could do it in a short period. But the reality is I do think hybrid is necessary. We need to have some in-person. The problem solving and innovation and creativity that comes when you start to get people literally together in rooms, or just think about from a career networking standpoint, the conversation that happens at the proverbial water cooler or the coffee machine that you don't have when we work from homes. Like that is some of the like magic by having us together, but create flexibility. So I'm hearing most leaders in the US are much more open to a hybrid model. But when I heard, yes, and I think it was last week, Amazon announcing 5 days back in the office, I heard my former employer, and it's public, I'm not breaking any confidence, also said you must be back in the office a certain day per week. And in some cases during COVID, they shut down offices. So you're resigning your job if that doesn't like that for me is when it starts to kind of cross the line.
Absolutely. So you seem to have such a positive outlook and so much insight. I know many of our listeners hear our guests and they say, that person seems to be able to see around the bend. How can they know what I'll never know? Don't you think everyone has themselves to be successful, to be a leader, perhaps a leader without a title, but a leader nonetheless?
I do. I think this goes to I think we should all be focused on our own career, regardless of what level you're at in the organization, and treat it as though you are the CEO of your career journey, of your brand, your personal brand, which I think is also really important to building your career journey. So that's in your control and that's within your power. And there's things you need to be thinking about that beyond the networking piece and who's going to be the mentor. That I believe that there's a coach helps you with performance. Mentorship can help with you a diverse number of things around understanding the organization, the industry as a whole. Maybe it's your job better. And then sponsorship, right? The person who advocates for you when you're not in the room. So, those are important. Brand is important. Performance. And I think there's a generation now that's used to getting participation ribbons and maybe not have it. And I have 2 of those myself. But
it's a trophy day.
Yeah, exactly. But it is incumbent to make sure you understand success metrics, how they're measured within your organization, like what do people deem as success in the organization, and maintaining the right skills to keep yourself relevant for today and the future. And so going back to our very start of the conversation around change and transformation and thinking about technology, around, we need to make ourselves more relevant. So for me personally, how, in addition to the fact that I've moved companies every few years, I've been a part of so many M&As, that's given me lots of insight to help see around some of those corners. But it's also the fact that I'm a voracious learner. So consuming content consistently and listening to people with different experience than I have and different perspective than I have.
Absolutely. Victoria, it has been a terrific conversation. So many insights, and I have a feeling we could just chat for hours. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing some of your thoughts with our listeners.
Thanks for having me.
We've been speaking with Victoria Pelletier, and this has been Jon Lobb for Strategy Next, brought to you by J. Helmy & Company.
Thank you for joining us on Strategy Next, where today's insights ignite tomorrow's possibilities. Subscribe now to never miss a conversation and share this journey with your network. Have ideas or feedback? Reach us anytime at strategynext@jhelmy.co. Join us next time as we explore new horizons in strategy and innovation. Until then, lead boldly and think beyond limits.